LIB 104, Introduction to Library Technical Services, Week 5, Collection Selection. In case you haven't noticed, each week there are identified outcomes related to the topics we cover in the readings, presentations, and videos. The outcomes for each week are listed on each week's Canvas page, but I also thought I should highlight them during the presentations so they're reinforced for you. This doesn't mean that they are all completely covered in the given week, but that the concepts are at least touched upon and will probably be expanded on later. So after this week, you should be able to begin to identify and explain elements and purposes of a library collection development policy. You should have some additional awareness of the deselection or weeding of library materials, and you should be able to begin to identify and discuss issues related to library collection development policies and deselection of other library materials. Collection development policies have a lot of purposes. One thing they do is they inform about the nature and scope of the collection. Policies should inform about collecting priorities. So not only should we know about what a library is collecting, we should also get an idea about what is important to that library. Hopefully this will provide goals related to the collection and its structure, which could be related back to the vision or mission of the library. The policy should also set standards for materials that it will include or exclude from the collection. If it's an academic library, for example, the standards might be aligned or defined by curriculum needs. For school libraries, the standards might be aligned to what's deemed appropriate for the age of the student. And public libraries might set standards aligned to community needs and interests. Since the policy is a document, it helps in creating consistent practices over time. That is, if a staff should change, a policy helps to support the continued standards of practice within the collection. Another idea that collection development policies often have to define is how does the library handle or address materials that people complain about or challenge. Challenges to materials are initiated by members of the library community to have certain materials either removed or restricted. But a process should be set in place to accommodate these challenges so that both the community members' concerns are acknowledged and so the library and the selection process is also protected. Related to this is how does the library choose when to weed and evaluate its collection? Having a process that's at least referenced or outlined can assist the library in handling challenges and questions about the materials in the collection. It's also helpful if the collection and development policy gives some sort of general budget allocations and details. They don't have to spell out the entire budget, as that will probably change from year to year, but maybe supplying a percentage or pointing to another document about budget items where possible assists in helping users understand any limitations, exceptions, or priorities within a collection. Collection development policies are essentially public relation documents. This means that when the policy itself, due to what it contains, helps the public understand what the library is doing, the library can use the document to support itself, and when done effectively, can even market itself to the community. Related to weeding and evaluation, collection priorities and the standards for inclusion and exclusion, and really all facets mentioned so far, is that the collection development policy should be providing programmatic benchmarks related to the performance of the collection and the library. Why keep a resource if it's not being used? Why purchase an item that has low interest? Ensuring that benchmarks are also defined assists in understanding decisions around the collection process. First, this leads to accountability. We want to make sure that our library collections are not just serving a purpose, but are accomplishing or striving toward that purpose. And the collection development policy itself provides a way to hold ourselves accountable to whatever that purpose may be. Other elements of collection development policies could include an institution's mission or long-range plans and goals. It could also provide an overview of the service population. Last week, we talked about needs assessments and environmental scans, which can capture details about a library's community population. Having such details in policies helps to frame collections and align them back to the community. A policy can also detail the subjects it wants to collect and the depth of coverage within each subject. And finally, the format of materials. Are they all books? Are there no books? Is it only electronic materials or audio or visual? The format is essential for highlighting policies so that the staff and community understand what might be found in the library. It's also helpful when policies outline various roles related to collection management aspects, such as selecting or discarding materials. Who can people contact if they have a question? This doesn't necessarily mean a name of a person, but perhaps a generic department or an area that oversees a specific aspect. But having that identified assists in understanding the process and the policy. If there are relationships to other branches, libraries, or institutions, this can also be highlighted in policy. Policies often have to show how gifts or donations are managed, especially in public libraries. All libraries can be victims of unnecessary donations if a policy is not clearly outlined. And finally, there may be some special requirements that are unique to a collection that could be covered in a policy. Maybe a library has a game collection that follows different standards. A collection development policy may also separate special requirements or considerations. Selecting materials will also be defined by the type of library they're coming from. We're able to compare two policies in our activity the other week, and many of you noted some great differences and similarities between the academic and public library policy. When we look at academic libraries, they should have a strong alignment to curriculum needs. This means they most likely will have a diverse range of subjects, and there may be certain subjects or areas that the college specializes in, or that it might have to support more than another area. Also, in larger academic institutions, you may see that one library, they may or may not be connected through a single policy, Or they may have an overarching policy and then separate, more specific policies for each library as well. Public libraries, on the other hand, have a diverse collection but probably won't go into much depth into any subject area. They probably will have a larger fiction collection than any academic library, as well as entertainment resources, such as a wider variety of magazines and videos. They will also carry materials that support a wider range of people, children, teenagers, adults, and any special groups in their community as well. School libraries, like academic libraries, will be looking at their curriculum. They also tend to have a strong literature-based collection. They are often there to support literacy for the students, which means more fiction than nonfiction, though they're also there to support information literacy, which requires nonfiction materials too. Special libraries are too unique to try and distill any great generalizations about their collections, but their collections are typically shaped by their specialized interests, whether that be music, art, history, law, or medicine. When looking at or trying to consider what to select for a library's collection, there are a few issues that come into play. One, of course, is the collection scope, as defined by the collection development policy. There may be specific user interests or needs, and these may be something that emerges throughout the year or outside of a policy. Additional languages or particular needs of a community may need to be considered as well. Funding is always and will always be a factor in what the library can select and what might be given priority. Knowing the materials costs is essential, and those costs go beyond just the purchase of an item, but also processing the materials, preservation, and continued access to online materials. If an item is available at another library, does your library really need to collect it too? Some say yes, others say no. It depends. It's complicated. But if something is of low priority for a library and can be accessed somewhere easily, you may want to consider another item or resource in its place. When assessing a collection, there might be gaps that are noticed, or areas that are completely lacking in materials. A targeted focus of these areas is sometimes called upon to improve the holdings. And the gaps might also not just be missing materials, but also materials that are outdated and need to be replaced, which raises the question of the quality of the materials. When adding materials to collections, libraries like to add reputable and high-quality material. This is why book review resources and other resource lists are used to ensure that materials are of sound quality. When a library is trying to identify gaps in the collection, there are many methods to employ. A simple way is to merely spend time in the library stacks referring to the library's bookshelves. Browsing the shelves is a great way to target specific areas. One can also notice dusty shelves and items which could indicate that these are not highly trafficked areas, and perhaps they should be considered for reading. Another quick way to identify gaps is to search in the library catalog, oftentimes called the OPAC, which stands for the Online Public Access Catalog, or its ILS, which is called the Integrated Library System. The difference between the two is the OPAC is just the catalog, the public-facing side of the catalog. In contrast, the ILS allows the staff to check out the items, catalog materials, and search the catalog, and more. You could search by a subject in either one to see if items come back and what kind of items are present for those subjects. Interlibrary loan requests are another piece of data to look at when identifying gaps. If a pattern is noticed where a particular subject is constantly asked for from other libraries, maybe the library should consider adding those materials to their own collection. Books on Demand is a service offered typically with ebook packages where ebook vendors supply a library with its entire catalog, but only charge the library for titles that people actually use. This model is also sometimes used with streaming video collections where views will trigger a purchase. It's an excellent way for libraries to provide access to resources they know their users will use without considering selection criteria. At the same time, it could also place the library's budget in a difficult situation if too many items are triggered by a curious community member or a one-time usage only, which brings up circulation statistics. Looking at high-use items could indicate that the subject the item is covering may be in high demand. Finding similar items in materials might be helpful. There are a lot of services out there to assist libraries in finding quality materials. For example, Booklist, Kirkus, Publishers Weekly, library journals. They're all standards. Choice, as you know, is targeted to academic libraries. School Library Journal focuses on school libraries. And the Horn Book Guide is created for young adult and children literature. Vendors also can provide lists or packages of curated materials that might be aligned to awards or newly released titles and academic subjects. Finally, whenever considering quality, one needs to consider the type of material that is being selected, with different factors coming into play. For example, if it's a work of fiction, the date of publication might not be that important, but for nonfiction materials, the date of publication might be crucial. Looking outside of publication lists and vendor sources, one may also want to consult with known experts, whether in person or by looking at websites or other writings. Knowing your audience and what they're looking for is another factor that may have different idea of what constitutes quality. Also, thinking about the reputation of the publisher or author may be a contributing factor as well. This week, you will be working on a collection development policy for the library you initiated last week with your needs assessment. Make sure to review your assignment from last week if you need to. You will be adding new titles to your Library Thing collection based on your collection development policy that you create. And then we'll have our weekly readings, quiz, plus an additional video from Fall at Tidal Wave, which is to provide you with another overview of a vendor's service offerings to libraries, in this case, school libraries. Have a great week.